November 28, 2023, Turkey. Just outside the popular resort town of Bodrum. The road here winds along a steep cliffside, offering dramatic views of the rocky coast. On a typical day, few cars pull over in this isolated stretch. But today, something by the roadside caught the eye of a passer-by. Just below the edge of the pavement, lying in the shallow ditch, were two large objects. Their shape and size seemed off, too deliberate, too unnatural to be discarded building debris. The man didn't climb down to check. Instead, he dialed emergency services. Responding officers quickly sealed off the area. Investigators approached the scene. In front of them, two elongated bundles tightly wrapped in what looked like bed linens and secured with thick ropes. The knots were firm, almost professional. Whoever did this had packaged the items in a way that made them easy to carry or load into the trunk of a vehicle. Forensic technicians opened the bundles on sight. The worst fears were confirmed. Inside the first package, an adult female. In the second, a teenage girl. The scene made one thing clear. This wasn't a random act on a remote. This was a calculated act, a crime that took place elsewhere. Someone had spent time wrapping the remains, transporting them out of town, and deliberately leaving them here. The victims hadn't just been harmed, they'd been prepared for disposal. The condition of their bodies revealed clear signs of aggressive assault. No identification was found on either victim, but the way the scene had been staged pointed to someone operating with cold precision, someone who knew exactly what they were doing. While experts were combing the roadside scene, events were unfolding back in a residential neighborhood of Bodrum. A close friend of Irina Diazova had been trying to reach her all day. Calls, messages, no response. It was completely out of character for Irina, who always kept in close touch with family and friends. Concerned, the woman drove over to the house where Irina lived with her two children. When no one answered the door, she let herself inside. The house was quiet, unnervingly so. At first glance, everything looked untouched. There were no signs of forced entry, no valuables missing, electronics, jewelry, personal belongings, all in place. But as she stepped deeper into the living area, the illusion of normally shattered. There were red stains prominent and unmistakable on the carpet and the upholstered furniture. The type and pattern of the stains left little room for doubt. This was serious. Along with that, the room bore signs of a struggle. Furniture knocked askew, scattered items strewn across the floor. Something violent had taken place here. This home, usually full of life, was now empty. Irina, 42 years old, was gone. So were her daughter, Diana, 15, and her younger son, Maker, just 5. There were no notes, no signs of departure, and no explanation for the disturbing scene left behind. The friend didn't continue her search. She immediately called local authorities. The investigative team that arrived at the villa quickly connected The dots. The descriptions of the missing residents matched the profiles of the two bodies found earlier, wrapped and left near the roadside. Blood traces inside the living room confirmed it. The crime had taken place right there. The villa was the primary scene, and that cliffside road was simply where the remains had been dumped. But the equation didn't add up. Only 2 people had been found. 5-year-old Maker was nowhere to be seen. From that moment, the case was reclassified from a double crime scene to a combination of violent assault and an abduction. Once it became clear that Maker had disappeared, local authorities launched an immediate point alert. Time was critical. But precious hours had already been lost. As patrol units swept highways and back roads searching for the boy, detectives focused on the one surviving member of the family, 20-year-old David, Irina's oldest son. He had spent that night with friends and was the only one unharmed. It was David who faced the heartbreaking task of identifying the remains of his mother and sister. While search efforts for Maker continued, detectives turned their attention to motive. Who would want to hurt this family? At first glance, Irina Devisova appeared to live the life of a well-off expat. After relocating to Bodrum in 2022, she curated a picture-perfect image on social media, a vision of peaceful motherhood and sun-soaked tranquility. But when investigators pulled her financial records, a different story emerged. The funds from the sale of her Moscow property, the money she had depended on, were nearly gone. A woman, once at the helm of her own business, was now piecing together income from scattered jobs, real estate consulting, yoga instruction, and anything else that came her way. Interviews with those close to her revealed a striking contradiction. Despite the financial downturn and the need to watch every lira, Irina had told friends she had never been happier. She claimed that this modest life in Turkey brought her peace. She had long-term plans to stay, and she was making every effort to become part of the local community. A review of her messages, social media activity, and personal correspondence led investigators to a clear conclusion. This move wasn't about leisure or a fresh start. It was about escape. Irina had been running from something or someone. She was trying to sever ties to her past. But whoever she had been hiding from knew her too well, knew her habits, her patterns, her way of life. To truly understand the roots of this tragedy, we have to rewind. Leave behind the sunny coast of Bodrum and travel far north to the frozen city of Norilsk in Russia. Irina was born there on July 9, 1981. When she was 12, her father passed away, leaving her mother solely responsible for raising her. Her mother enrolled her in a modeling school, hoping to turn her daughter's looks into opportunity. That decision would shape the course of Irina's future. She started booking small ad campaigns, appearing in regional commercials, and taking part in local beauty contests. At one of those regional events, Irina met Otar Usurashi. From the very beginning, he laid everything on the table. He was married and had no intention of getting Divorced. Irina accepted her role as part of what could only be described as a second household. In 2003, the couple welcomed a son, David. 5 years later, their daughter Diana was born. Otar didn't just provide, he built a financial foundation for them. In 2007, he appointed Irina as CEO and co-founder of a wellness center in Nurulk. He also transferred ownership of multiple apartments and commercial properties to her name. Renting out those spaces gave her a steady stream of passive income. In 2011, Otar passed away. According to his will, Irina inherited a substantial fortune, business interests, properties, and financial assets. His death marked a turning point. With no reason to stay in the far north, she sold everything in Nurulk and moved to Moscow with her son and daughter. In the capital, she invested her inheritance and began living the life of an affluent single mother, exclusive schools, equestrian clubs, high society gatherings. It was during the height of that seemingly perfect life in 2016 that she met the man who was supposed to be her protector, but who would eventually become her greatest threat. As investigators examined Irina's past and personal connections, they inevitably turned their attention to her second husband. The background of Andrei Kushlovich stood out sharply from those of typical Moscow businessmen. By the time he was 39, Andrei had already served in the French Foreign Legion. For nearly 7 years, he had been part of one of the world's most selective and secretive military organizations, trained in advanced weaponry, tactical survival, and high-stress operations. That experience made him disciplined, but also deeply dangerous. He was used to solving problems by force. When he returned to civilian life in the early 2000s, Andrei turned those skills into profit in the private security world. He quickly built a name for himself as a dependable bodyguard. In 2016, a major oligarch hired him for personal protection. For a time, he performed his duties flawlessly. But then something shifted. Andrei decided the pay didn't match his value. And instead of resigning, he chose another form of compensation. Using his access to the oligarch's property, the bodyguard committed a major theft, making off with a rare diamond and a collection of high-value jewelry. The estimated value of the stolen items exceeded 5 million. With that, he fled back to Russia. Somehow, he managed to cross borders and vanish, evading capture despite international search efforts. And it was during this time in hiding on the run and carrying millions in stolen wealth that Andrei met Irina at a party. A wealthy single mother and a former mercenary wanted for a high-profile crime. On paper, it didn't make sense. But to Irina, his shadowy past didn't seem to matter. In fact, it may have been exactly what drew her in. In the ex-legionnaire, she saw strength. She saw protection. The events that unfolded followed the textbook pattern of a psychological trap. Despite being an international fugitive, Andrei Kushlovich had a kind of charisma that disarmed suspicion. He didn't just convince Anna to live with him. He convinced her to make the relationship official. In 2017, the couple married in Lithuania. The fact that Andrei had illegally crossed an international border to attend the ceremony, all while being actively sought by law enforcement, wasn't a red flag for Irina. To her, it was proof of undying love and commitment. In the early days of their marriage, Andrei played his part flawlessly. He stepped into the role of a devoted partner and a caring father figure to Irina's son David and her daughter Diana. He showered them with attention, building the illusion of a protective wall around the family, one they could feel safe behind, but that sense of safety wouldn't last. Everything changed in 2018 with the birth of their son, Maker. That moment, the arrival of his biological child seemed to trigger a complete transformation. The mask came off. The devoted partner was gone. What remained was a man who began running the household like a military unit. What followed was disturbing. Andrei imposed strict routines, demanded complete obedience, and used emotional pressure to control everyone under the roof. The rules weren't suggestions. They were orders. According to those close to the family, the former Legionnaire's behavior soon escalated from harsh discipline to outright aggression. No one was spared. Irina, her elderly mother, her sister, and the older children all faced his wrath. But these weren't chaotic outbursts of rage. They were calculated. He drew on his combat training, striking in ways meant to inflict maximum pain without leaving visible injuries. Soft tissue blows. No bruises, no fractures. Nothing a doctor could document. Life inside what looked like a luxury home had turned into a controlled facility. Every mistake had consequences, and then it reached a breaking point. One night, over a minor household mistake, Andrei locked Irina in a cold basement and left her there until morning. No explanation. No communication, just punishment. That moment was a turning point. The message was clear. She was no longer in control of her life or her wealth. She was a hostage in her own home, and her future rested entirely on the whims of her captor. That night in the basement shattered the illusion. Irina realized that staying under the same roof as Andrei was no longer just painful. It was dangerous. She made a decision. Acting quickly and decisively, Irina listed her apartment in Moscow, the last major asset tying her to the city. Once it sold, she gathered David, Diana, and Maker and left Russia behind. By 2022, the family had settled in Turkey. Irina bought a villa in Bodrum, hoping that distance and international borders would finally keep the threat at bay. The hope that distance would equal safety turned out to be a tragic miscalculation. Andrei Kushlevich, armed with tactical training and likely connections in the underground world, managed to track down his ex-wife's new home. Despite being internationally wanted, he crossed borders and followed the family to Turkey. He made contact, but he wasn't looking to rekindle a marriage. His focus was singular. 5-year-old Maker. Andrei insisted on visitation and wanted A say in raising the boy, attempting to reassert control. Irina refused. Instead of negotiation, she chose legal protection. She went to the local authorities and successfully obtained a court-issued restraining order, barring Andrei from contacting or approaching her and the children. But that wasn't the end. She took a more decisive step. Irina's attorneys began preparing the paperwork to terminate Andrei's parental rights. According to investigators, that legal move was the spark that lit the fuse. For a man used to solving problems through force, being legally cut off from his son may have felt like a personal attack and a challenge he wouldn't ignore. Detectives turned their attention to digital forensics. Security footage from the villa's perimeter gave them the breakthrough. The cameras recorded a vehicle approaching the property. Behind the wheel, Andrei that he was physically present in Bodrum confirmed their worst fears. The safeguards Irina had put in place had failed. Footage showed him entering the home. An hour later, movement resumed. Andrei began carrying large, heavy objects out of the house and into the trunk of his car. He didn't rush. His movements were slow, deliberate, like he was following a pre-planned checklist. There was no visible panic, no sign of emotional turmoil, just precision. But it was what came next that became the most damning piece of evidence. After the last item was loaded, 5-year-old Maker appeared on camera. He stepped out of the house and climbed into the same vehicle calmly, willingly. He had no idea what had just happened inside. What the surveillance footage captured was critical. It gave investigators a timestamp, a clear look at the car, and confirmation that Maker had left the scene alive. But by the time police reviewed the footage, valuable hours had passed. Based on ballistic evidence and blood pattern analysis in the living room, forensic experts reconstructed the sequence of events down to the second. Andrei hadn't forced entry. Investigators believe he either kept a set of keys or Irina had opened the door herself, unaware of the danger. The conversation, if there was one, was brief. Things escalated instantly. The situation turned fatal almost immediately. The crime scene told investigators that the victims had tried to escape. Shifted furniture and chaos throughout the room pointed to panic in the first few seconds, but against an armed professional, the woman and her daughter had no real chance. Andrei acted with chilling precision. He pulled out a handgun and fired with lethal intent. The investigation determined that he discharged several aimed shots. Irina and her 15-year-old daughter Diana sustained fatal gunshot wounds. It was a swift, cold execution. The former Legionnaire left them no opportunity to survive. When the shots stopped, Kushlovich didn't flee. Instead, he moved into the next phase. Methodical cleanup. Standing in the room with 2 bodies, he calmly began preparing them for transport. He used bed sheets and rope found inside the house, wrapping the bodies tightly into makeshift bundles to prevent blood from staining the vehicle during removal. Throughout this time, 5-year-old Maker was still inside the same building. Investigators believe he was either asleep or locked inside his room. The psychological profile of the offender shows a complete shutdown of empathy. In one part of the house was his living son, while in the next room he was coldly packaging the bodies of the woman and daughter he had just shot. A gray sedan carrying the bodies in the trunk, and his living son in the passenger area, left Bodrum and headed toward remote mountainous terrain. Andrei chose a stretch of highway where the shoulder dropped sharply, forming a natural slope into a roadside ditch. It was there on that incline that he discarded the main burden. He pulled the bundles from the car and pushed them down the slope, counting on the landscape to hide them from passing drivers. The entire process took only minutes. After disposing of the bodies, Kushlovich did not return to the villa. The escape plan was already in motion, while authorities were still beginning to connect the roadside discovery with the abandoned home. The suspect was increasing the distance between himself and the scene. Investigators later confirmed that Andrei and his son left Turkey in the shortest possible time. Even though his vehicle and appearance were known, he still managed to cross an international border. That success was no accident. Andrei, who had already been internationally wanted before the crime, had prepared a full set of forged documents. He used fake passports that allowed both him and his son to pass border control without triggering Interpol security systems. The former Legionnaire followed pre-established routes, likely relying on old connections to secure a clean passage. He vanished somewhere in Europe, taking with him the only living witness, 5-year-old Maker. For investigators, this was the worst possible outcome. The offender was identified, but his location was once again unknown, and the life of the boy now depended on a man who had just carried out a cold and calculated crime against the rest of his family. The period from November 2023 to May 2024 became one of the most complex and prolonged manhunts in recent history. For 6 months, law enforcement agencies in Turkey, Russia, and across the European Union searched for any digital or physical trace of the grey sedan that had left Bodrum. The situation appeared almost surreal and sparked public outrage. How could a man with an active Interpol red notice, the highest priority alert calling for immediate arrest, move freely across Europe, a region saturated with surveillance cameras and facial recognition systems? Investigators say the key to Andrei Kushlovich's remarkable ability to vanish lies in his background. He wasn't just some petty criminal. His time in the French Foreign Legion and the successful disappearance following a multi-million euro theft in 2016 had taught him how to become a ghost. Years of operating in the shadows allowed him to build a network of underground contacts and amass a significant amount of liquid assets. Cash that didn't leave a digital footprint. Those old connections likely helped him secure a new set of high-quality forged documents in a matter of days. Identities that could pass routine checks. He moved constantly, never staying in one location for long. He avoided using credit cards, refused to register SIM cards in his name, and only traveled routes with limited Surveillance. He was a master at staying off the radar. And through it all, 5-year-old Maker was by his side. Effectively a hostage to his father's ambitions. Irina's family lived in a nightmare, not knowing whether the boy was alive or if he'd met the same fate as his mother and sister. Search teams kept hitting dead ends. Kushlovich was always one step ahead. This high-stakes cat-and-mouse game might have gone on for years if Andrei hadn't made one critical mistake. Likely due to overconfidence, he attempted to leave the Schengen zone or switch countries by using civilian air travel. Booking a seat on an international flight means passing through biometric systems and security databases. Something even forged documents can't always bypass. That decision proved to be his downfall. In May 2024, at an airport terminal in Germany, the 6-month manhunt came to an end. Kushlovich was preparing to board a flight to another country. He cleared the initial security check using the same fake documents that had gotten him through borders before, but this time the system flagged him. His biometric data matched the Interpol red notice, pulling him out of the blind spot. German police, after confirming the alert, moved in. He was apprehended at the departure gate. The arrest was swift, but the most important outcome wasn't just capturing the fugitive. It was the discovery of Maker. The 5-year-old was with his father, missing for 6 months. The boy was alive. Child Protection Services immediately took custody of him and transferred him to Irina's relatives, who took over his care. As of now, Andrei Kushlovich remains in custody, awaiting extradition to Turkey. Prosecutors in Bodrum have filed formal charges. The evidence, from security footage to forensic results, supports a case for a double crime with extreme cruelty, as well as the abduction of a minor. Under Turkish law, the former Legionnaire faces life imprisonment. His attempt to run from the past by switching countries and identities ended in a holding cell.